Tonight, we're fortunate to have Hinchey with us. He's going to tell us about living at the actual Hinchey homestead. If you don't know about it, we have a historic house on Hinchey Road, and we are open to tours. You just have to call and make arrangements for a time. We also have some books on sale. If you're interested in more of the Gates history and characters from that time period, you can buy those. Just see me, and I'll give you more details. You're welcome.
I don't normally use something like this. So. Is it? No, I know, but I don't know if it's too loud or not loud enough. Well, when Sue apparently said something to my wife about doing this about 6-8 months ago, I said, "Oh, what do you mean?" And, she said, "Well, no, you just have to say what it was like to live there." And I said, "Oh, okay." And then I promptly forgot. And shortly in the winter, I got a refresher reminder from Sue, and I said, "Okay, yeah," and then forgot it again until about May. But anyways, I'm here, and I'd like to thank the Historical Society for everything they've done to the house, for the house, to preserve the house, promote the house. There's not very many people that can stand back and say, that was my house, and have it been taken care of the way they have. So they deserve a big round of applause for what they've done. I guess I'll start at the beginning. When I was a child there, I was really sort of oblivious to the whole situation. You know, you come home from the hospital, you don't know anything, you're a kid, you grow up, you start to grow a little bit, and it was a farm, you know, and it was a wonderful experience because as I got a little older, you know, we had all sorts of animals and whatnot, but I was unaware, with my age and whatnot, that, you know, the small family farm was in decline, and it seemed like a big farm to me, but at the time I think it was sort of diminishing. But be that as it may, we had about 80 head of cattle, and which sounds a lot, but I currently live out in Leroy, and the people around the corners, they have 2,000 head. So it's a little different animal or a situation. So it was a pretty sophisticated operation. My grandfather was, these were Holstein cows, and they kept meticulous records on the bloodlines and whatnot. So they had been at it for a number of years. My great-grandfather was the one that really set it up. And then it obviously came to my grandfather and then my father, or his brother, excuse me. But, see where I am here. It was a really good experience as a kid because you have barns, you have animals, you have all that. And I also had cousins. And my cousins, Ron Hinchey's here, his father, and my other cousin Pete and Bill, they were the ones basically working the farm. And they're about, I think the youngest one's like 15 years older than me. So I would go down to the barn at night because to get the cream, and that's another story. And they would teach me all sorts of swear words. And you know, it was, I'm sure my mother was horrified. But so I'd come back and they'd say, go tell Auntie, my great aunt lived with us, that she's crazier than, you know what. Of course I do that. And, but my mother, obviously horrified, but she said, you know, to tell me I couldn't say anything like that would have been sort of counterproductive. So she just said, oh no, you can't do that, Wilton. It's barn talk. So it made sense to me. When I got to the barn, I swore like a trooper. And when I got in the house, I didn't swear anymore. So it was, it worked phenomenally, I guess. I mean, I didn't get punished or anything, but boy, I could do it in the barn. But every night I went down to now I was only about 5, 6 years old at this time. I'd go down to the barn to get the cream, because who could eat Cheerios without cream on them? And they were absolutely delicious. Of course, later in life I had some stomach problems. So I told my wife, I said, boy, those are great, those Cheerios with cream on them. And she said, that's good. You know, and you had stomach problems, didn't you? I said, So but it was really an interesting, can you hear all right? It was really an interesting experience because, as I said, we had cows and pigs and chickens. We had a lot of chickens and horses. And my father was he had a horse. He had 2 horses, actually. One was an old black blind mare, just a wonderful horse. And she'd be out in the pasture and just a nice horse. And then he had a racehorse. And my mother lived in total fear of him getting involved with a racehorse, which he did to a degree, but nothing really serious. We also had fruit trees. I think the farm itself had been not so much during my time, but really pretty self-sustaining. They had fruit trees. They had all the animals, of course. Then they had fruit trees. They had apples, peaches, pears, cherries, you name it. It was, you know, you just rotated around the yard. I had all the fruit that I ever could imagine, and it was wonderful. But you know, as time went on, those trees, the pear tree got hit by lightning, and I took care of that. And the peach tree just got old and fell down. So little by little, they went away. But at one point, it was quite a little operation. They had you know, between the fruit trees and the animals and whatnot. So I had an aunt that lived with my great aunt that lived with us. I'm getting out of order here a little bit. But she apparently, when my grandmother died in 1940, her sister moved in. Now, her name was Anna Terrell, and the Terrells lived just down Hinchey Road. I mean, towards Pixley. And the house, I mean, they built a house around that old house that was there. And I asked my father or my grandfather about it one time, and he wasn't real communicative about it. He said, nah, they didn't have any money. So Auntie moved in with us. Apparently that was a traditional thing. If the lady in the house died, her sister came and moved in. There was didn't have to get along, you could move in. 'Cause I really don't recall them ever saying a good word to one another. And she lived there for many years, or I say many, 6, 7, I was 8 or 9 by the time she had to go to somewhere else. But she was a phenomenal baker. I mean, she baked bread and cooked, she made applesauce bread. She made this stuff succotash, which is, you know, most people hate lima beans. I love lima beans, and I don't know why, but she was wonderful. I mean, it was, But as I say, she and my grandfather they weren't best buddies at all. But they looked out for one another, and she was a strict Presbyterian. In fact, after when I was going through the house and looking over things, she must have had 10 Bibles, and in each Bible she'd write in the edges of them, and she read every day. But it was funny because she's the one that taught me how to play euchre. And my father used to say to her, "Well, Auntie, how did you learn how to play euchre? That's a barroom game." "Oh no," she said, that's no barroom game." Well, it was, of course. And at one point, my grandfather had a sort of a dizzy spell, and sort of, I don't know if he collapsed, but he went very unsteady. And she raced and came with a bottle of whiskey. Now, if you ever had met Anna Terrell, no liquor had ever touched her lips. But she was a strict Presbyterian, and of course we could play cards all week, but not on Sunday. And I mean nothing on Sunday. Sunday was the most boring day ever in that house. Because my mother was a librarian. So her response to me was, "Oh, okay, just can't you read a book?" I said, "I don't think so." And so that was sort of my youth, if you will. And but I was, at the time, I was really sort of oblivious to what was going on around as far as the farm, the actual farm. But my uncle, who was running the farm, and he and my cousins, my first cousins, as I said, they were about 15 years older than I was, and they ran the farm, and their father passed away in 1954. My grandfather was in his 80s, and the combination of his oldest son dying and him being in his 80s, and my father, I'm not sure what he was doing, but they decided that the farm, they needed to unwind the farm, and subsequently had an auction. As I said, when my great aunt lived there, she lived in if you've ever been in the house, the downstairs bedroom, that's where she lived. So, but my grandfather and I don't know if anybody's ever, when you spend a lot of time with a grandparent, you sort of become buddies. And my grandfather taught me how to play cribbage, because he lived with us too. It was quite a little thing we had going. And so every night after dinner, it was, sort of tradition that I went and played cribbage with him. And that worked out really well until I started beating him. And he didn't like that. But we still watched Westerns together and wrestling. And we actually had a real good time, and I loved him dearly, and he was an interesting guy, because he had this good friend. I'm sort of getting off my outline here. We had a friend that lived next door to the west, named Mr. Ames. And Mr. Ames had worked for McFarland's, sold hats or whatever. But Mr. Ames had retired, so he'd come up every day, or 2 or 3 times a week anyways, and play cribbage with my grandfather. And of course, they played cards, but they also had a couple of cocktails during the afternoon. And my mother, who was a school teacher, would come home, and you know, they were having a grand old time, and she'd come home, just came home after school, and then my father would come home. So it was an interesting, you know, the dynamics were pretty good. But one thing Mr. Ames had, and the guys, the man, John Contestable and his wife, on the other side, to the east, they both had these incredible gardens. And, you know, we had a garden too, but it was, I mean, these guys really knew what they were doing. And they got into this sort of competition, and, you know, the east porch of the house started to look like a produce stand. Because one guy would come and he'd drop a basket off, you know, of everything, and then the other guy, he'd drop a basket off, and so consequently, we never had a garden during my time anyway, so. What else? Oh, we had pets. And,
That's what counts.
Right?
That's what counts.
And we had a dog. The first dog that I had was a dog named Fritz. Fritz was a German short-haired pointer, and she was famous in the neighborhood because, for one, you could see every bone in her back and every rib, but she ate like a horse. But one thing Fritz didn't like was thunder and lightning. She loved the kids and everything, and you couldn't touch any of the kids in the neighborhood, or she'd be right at you. But when it thundered and lightning, if she was outside, she was going to get inside. And if she was inside, she wanted to get outside. So consequently, virtually every door in that house is chewed up pretty good. And in some instances, the floor too. I mean, she was unbelievable. And well, you could handle that if it's just your house. But one day she got locked in the people across the street, the gardener's garage. Oh my God. She, you know, rather than jump through the window, she chewed out from underneath the window. Well, that turned into a neighborhood kerfuffle anyway. But then after her, we had, my mother came home after about the third door got chewed up and said, no, we're gonna have to make some decisions here. It's either me or the dog. You know, my father, not being the diplomat, he said, can I get back to you? And he was like that. He put his foot in his mouth all the time. But the dog went, which was too bad because it was really a good dog except for that. But
Except
which was
destroying
you
the
know.
house.
Then we got another dog, Kim 1. And she was a Norwegian elkhound. Now how we got that, I don't know. But she was just a wonderful dog. She was like a husky, you know, and she was the nicest dog. In fact, she's the dog in that picture there of my father sitting in his chair. And she also was afraid of thunder and lightning. Only she'd go hide. And it'd be thunder and lightning and where's Kim? And nobody'd know where she went. So we'd go out and look for her. One day I was about 4 houses down the road. On the other side, that's rapped on the door, I think it was Huck's house, and lady came to the door, said, oh, hi, Mr. Hinchey, how you doing? Your dog's here. I said, oh, good, you know. And I walked in, and of course the dog was there and whatnot, and it was a whole setup, you know, for a dog. You know, the water dish, the food, the whole thing. And I said, oh yeah, your dog must really not like that. You know, your dog must get upset about this. She goes, oh no, we don't have a dog. You know, so that was Kim number 1. So then my father got a black lab. And the black lab was huge, just huge. And she used to fall asleep on one of those ottomans, you know, you have a chair where you put your feet up. Only she was big, and she'd fall asleep, and not long after she'd just fall off. But she was called Kim number 2 because he just kept calling her Kim after the first dog. So we decided, well, forget about it, just call her Kim, you know? So that was the pets. And what else?
You were talking about the auction before. Where did that go?
Oh, the auction. Well, yeah, thank you. The auction, once the farm sort of unraveled, if you will, they decided they needed to have an auction. And they auctioned off the cattle and equipment and that sort of thing. And I just remember it was sort of I was pretty young. I was probably 6 or 7, and it was really pretty chaotic, but I was having a good time because the auctioneer had a concession truck, and I could get as much chocolate milk as I wanted. So the auction was sort of a fun event for me, but I'm sure it wasn't for my father or my cousins or any. It was pretty traumatic. Because, you know, they did things like they had to sell they sold the weather vane off the top of the barn, which was like almost, I wouldn't say a full-blown horse, but it was a pony. And, you know, things like that you just, so they were probably heartbroken by it. You know, I was too young really to fathom that, but I'm sure as I got older, I said, oh boy. Yes?
During the auction, did you think that you really have to move?
I was too young to really process that, to be honest with you. That's what I mean. I was oblivious to sort of what was really going on. But what happened, in retrospect, my father sort of said, okay, this got sold, but we're gonna circle up the wagons here, and we're not getting rid of the house. He didn't say that to me, but when I think back on it, that's exactly what he did. You know, it was like he was gonna be the last man standing there for sure. And he was. I mean, that's the way he did it. But one thing they did, you mentioned the auction. Of course, they sold all the equipment, and part of the equipment was a tractor. And I wrote down on my thing here,
When was this when you auctioned off we had this big auction? When was that?
1954, 55.
Oh.
Yeah. But as part of that, you know, what I was going to say is, with my father, you could take him off the farm, but you couldn't take the farm out of him. So shortly after that, after that had been sold, he went out and bought a tractor and a disc, and you sort of reconnected with his farming feelings. And of course, we didn't have any place. The disc was, what are you doing? What are you gonna do? Disc the front lawn? Almost happened. But he, what he did do, and if you sort of got to put things in perspective. He was friends with the guy S.V. Moffett, and S.V. Moffett sold golf course equipment, and he went and bought one section of a golf course mower or gang mower, and that's what that was before like Cub Cadets and John Deere's and all that. So that was a big deal. You get the tractor, you need cut 36 inches at a shot, you know, which didn't take long for us to say that this isn't doing much here. And, but he would let me, of course, I wanted to drive the tractor. And so he let me drive the tractor. But there's one caveat. You gotta drive it in first gear. So, you know, I don't know, if you've ever been around a tractor running in first gear, you can walk faster. And so, you know, I mowed the lawn, had a great time doing it. Took about a day and a half. You know, but after that, we finally graduated, got a little older, and he thought, well, you know, so we got 2 more sections. Now we're really special. And but I figured out by then I was an accomplished tractor driver, and I could really motor it around. He didn't like that. He said, you scrape the trees. So by the time I got to be 16, I might be one of the few people on the planet that was not allowed to mow the lawn. True story. No, you know. I said, I'll mow the grass. No. But once I thought about it, that was his way of returning to his roots. And, you know, wherever he was, he had to get home to mow the grass. Even if he'd done it yesterday, he had to do it again today. So it was, please, if anybody's got a question, jump in here. Yes, please.
Are there still fruit trees on the property?
There's an apple tree, there's at least an apple tree. There's not, I don't think so. Well, no, I don't, maybe an apple tree.
There's an apple tree.
But there used to be, there was a really nice pear tree, but it got hit by lightning or something, and that came down. But I don't know. I haven't been around a place that has pear trees at all.
Anyway, what year did the big barn burn down?
It didn't burn down. That was shortly after the auction. I've got a quote here for, you know, no farm. What do you need a barn for? Big barn. And and the barn was not in great shape. It wasn't horrible. Wasn't caving in or anything like that, like you see when you go around. But it was not. We'd had it for a number of years after that. In fact, my cousin, he went into the livestock business, like transporting, brokering pigs, and he had quite a business brokering hogs, and he would use the barn. He'd come in, he'd use the shed by the side of the current barn, and then occasionally when there was overflow, he'd use the part of the big barn to sort of offload pigs, because he used to go to, at that time there was what, 3 or 4, there was Pavilion, Caledonia, Canandaigua or whatever,
Caledonia.
livestock auctions during the
Caledonia.
week, and he'd go and people had and buy them, and then he'd reconfigure it, and they'd ship them to Indiana, or what he did do is they went to Tobin Packing, and as a kid I used to ride, that was a big deal. I'd get in the truck with him and go to Tobin Packing, you know, which is, you know, when you're a little kid and you're in the.
What was the original acreage and what were the boundaries when your grandfather started it out?
Well, I thought it was, John, you unearthed some information that was around 300 acres. I thought at one point it was.
It was a Brooklyn Country Club, was it?
But not all of it.
Not all of it.
No.
Up Howard Road to the track.
Yeah. It was about 300 acres, but I thought at one point during my great-grandfather's time, I think it was more than that, but I've owned 300, which sounds about right. Pardon me?
Your family used to own all the way down Brooklyn, all the way over to the golf course.
Yes.
Yeah. And Hickory Road.
Yeah.
Lansing Circle, Maryland Parkway.
Right, right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and those 12 acres.
Up to the tracks.
I was
Up to
trying
the
picture
tracks,
where you
which is a
pastured
different story
80
there.
cows and grew
Yes.
everything
On
you
the
needed
farm,
for
when you
them.
were young, were there hired hands and servants?
Yes. Not so much during my time. We had a, well, we had a lady that did work in the house. But my grandfather lived there, my great aunt lived there, my mother worked, my father worked, and I was, you know, a little kid. So, I wouldn't call them servants, but servant, but she was sort of a housekeeper, you know, did a little more of that, and, but at one point, I guess there was, I don't know if they were servants. I think they were, when the farm was really working, there were certain people that did, you know, certain things.
You had hired men that
Yeah,
worked.
hired, you know, and then there was, I heard my father say, I can't remember exactly what her name was, but in the back hall there was
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, there was 4 rooms in the back hall that's where they stayed.
Yeah.
And the house is configured so they all ate together, but there was a stairway that went up to the back, and you didn't have to go in the front of the house to get upstairs, which is, you know. But no, I wouldn't. You're not. There was no slave type thing. There was a guy. I was the slave. And I'll tell you why. You know, obviously it's a big house, and what they've done, what the Historical Society has done, is they took off the front porch, you know, but that was the original. I mean, that's the way it was originally, which, you know, I wish they'd done it before, but my grandmother apparently wanted a front porch. So they built a front porch, and it was wrong. It was wrong because that portion of the house gets all the morning sun. And what would happen is you could paint it every year. You know, it would just burn the paint off. You know, I must have painted it 10 times myself. You know, and then in the winter, most of it wasn't covered, so the snow would sit there, and about every 5 years, you had to replace all the deck. I mean, it was a disaster. But that really wasn't, you know, the Historical Society figured that one out pretty quick, I think. And it's good, because it looks better, and it's not there. But one of the real problems that I got myself into was I wanted to earn some money, and the blinds, you know, the shutters, they needed painting. And I said, "Oh, let's make a deal." And my mother said, "Well, yeah, how about $1 a set?" And I said, you know, it was a bad mistake. Of course, I thought that was a lot of money at the time. There's 30 sets of shutters on, you know, and each set has 2 blinds. So 60 blinds you had to paint. Well, I got about 10 blinds into it. I said, oh, this is not good. And so fortunately, we conned somebody into spray painting it. But it was, yes.
How old were you when you moved out of the house?
Well,
That's an interesting question. Which time? Well, you know, I went to college, so that was, I guess, I don't know if that's technically moving out of the house. I got out of college and I moved back to the house because I didn't have a job right away. And then I worked for Dolomite for 3.5 years, so probably I was about 24, which is about 3 years longer than it should have been, but. And my mother reminded me. So, if you're getting the impression that my mother was a strong person, she was. Oh, we had a really a wonderful neighborhood. We had all sorts of kids. We had the Testas, they were on the other side, the Gardners, the Ashes, the Closes. We actually pretty much have a legitimate, not a full baseball team, but have a good baseball game in the east side of the driveway where the big barn had been. So that was a lot of fun, and we ended up we'd sort of feed on one another. Myself and a guy named Tom Ash were the youngest, which led, so we of course did everything the old guy said. And so at one point, somebody had bought a lot car. This is after the barn had been taken down, and the back field had been leveled, and so we had this lot car that we drove back there. I mean, how we didn't kill ourselves, I don't know. But I mean, it wasn't a bad car, but it was not worth much after we got done with it. But one of the other things that we did is, and this involved the tractor, somebody said, well, why don't we get the hood of a car? Well, back then, you could get a Buick hood or an Oldsmobile hood, and it had like a lip on it that would come in. They were heavy. So we chained it to the back of the tractor. And about 3 or 4 of us would get on, somebody would drive, it was usually me. There was 3 or 4 guys would get on the back, and I'll tell you, we had a ball. You could drive through woods and bang off the stuff and everything. It was pretty good. And but they were great. It's like saucers. But it was slippery as all get out, and so it was no problem. But we had but then we had the current barn right now. If you notice, it has a thing on the paint job on the 1961, right on the cornerstone. And I believe Dave Testa painted that there. I had to take the fall for it, but I think he did. But that barn up above, the 2nd and 3rd floor, was basically our clubhouse. And we just purloined it, and that was the good news. So it was great. We had a place for, clubhouse and nothing. Problem is, my uncle had chickens up there for I don't know how long. But chickens, the stuff was about like that deep. So we had to clean it all out, which of course, my father had no problem with that. But the top floor, and they always called it the cabbage house. I never knew cabbage was in there, but it's an interesting barn. There's chutes that go all from the 3rd floor right down to the ground floor. But the upstairs is the 3rd floor is pretty open, except for a few, cross beams, and we used that as a basketball court. So it was all right until you tried to shoot over one of the beams, and that didn't. But that was a lot of fun. We had a good time doing that. So it's a wonder we didn't burn it down, but it's that was. What else? Please, if you have any, I think I got a couple more here. I had this all in order, and then I got out of order. Oh, the holidays. The holidays, well, it gets back to the all the farm, the eating, when they were eating together, the dining room table, you could stretch out, it would seat 16. 16.
16.
I mean, all the leaves and everything you put in.
Put three
And,
leaves in it.
so, my family, my mother and father, and we always had Thanksgiving, and all my mother's relatives from Leroy and Batavia would come. And it was a big deal, you know, just stretch it all the way out, and turkeys, and get out the fine china. Some of the china that I never was allowed to eat on until I was about 40. I'm serious. It was, you know, oh no, those were great aunt.
That is the menace.
Oh, none of us. You had to be. I think you had to be 40 to even look at them. You know? They had this. Oh, they were from Wedgwood china in a special color that you couldn't
like my
replicate.
house.
So obviously they didn't let us touch them. But that was. But anyways, Thanksgiving was a real big deal. Christmas, not. Well, I mean, it was Christmas. Obviously, is a big deal, but that was more immediate family, and the problem with that was the Christmas tree always was a problem, because my father could not bring himself to get a Christmas tree. Back in the day, remember before the real Christmas tree stands? Well, we had one where it was a nice stand, except for the fact the tree had to be perfect. And if it wasn't perfect, it wasn't gonna work. And so we suffered through a number of those, you know, the tree like this and this. But he really didn't want to buy a real nice tree because his grandfather, my great grandfather, he didn't let him have a tree. They said, well, what did you do? He said, well, they had a stump. It was like the precursor to the artificial tree. They had a trunk or a stump with holes in it. They go out and cut boughs off and stick the things into the stump. You know, I don't think it was a bad idea, but I mean, I'm not gonna do it. But he was scarred for life with that. You know, he couldn't. I mean, really, he literally could not buy a good Christmas tree. You know, but then they came with these new Christmas tree stands where you can buy one that's as crooked as all get out and make it stand straight. But that was Christmas. And, it was good though. I mean, we, you know, still had the presents and everything, so I got over it fast enough. I don't want to wear out my welcome here, but got the black card. I'm sure I'll think of something else. Yes.
So did you have a lot of parties in the summertime? Hay rides and get-togethers?
No, actually, we didn't. We camped out. You know, of course, we went on the other side of the driveway. That was like camping out. You know? So, we had a tent. You know, I had a tent and whatnot, and of course, you never went to sleep at the right time, and you were out around all night. But that was sort of the camping that. I lost my train of thought there because, the parties. Well, you know, my parents were fairly, they were tuned into what could happen when they weren't there. And they didn't expose themselves that many times. But there were times when, and it's a great house for a party, you know. I'm surprised there was a couple people I thought might be here, and I didn't want them to talk, you know. But we had a good time. We did my parents were pretty generous when it came to, if they had any idea that we'd been overserved or whatever, they'd make everybody stay there, you know, if there was.
Sleepover.
Yeah, sleepovers, yeah. So, but, yes,
I want to ask about the picture of the harness horse in the dining room. What was the affinity with harness racing?
well, my mother gave that to my father.
Okay,
We had, the two horses that we had when I was growing up was, one was the black blind mare, and then there was another one called Symbol Ellen. Symbol Ellen was a trotter, and she raced at Vernon Downs. And this is interesting because we would go on Friday night after work. This is before the thruway, and drive to Vernon to see the horse race. Of course, I slept in the car, but and then come back. But at Sundays, we stabled the horse, or my father did, up at Weber's outside of Churchville. There used to be, as you're going towards Churchville, on the right there was a farm, and then on the left there was a racetrack, a jogging track. And it's all gone now, which I can't believe, but every Sunday we'd go out there, because my grandfather was good friends with Doc Weber, and they'd sit and, I don't know, drink whiskey, and we'd go over to the barn. Yes.
Were you born, when you were living on Hinchey Road?
Yes.
Oh,
Well, I
okay.
mean, that's where when I came from the hospital, yeah.
So you grew up on Hinchey
Yeah.
Road. My name is Ken Georger.
Okay, yes.
We moved, my mother and father, my older brother, who was just 90 years old, the 7th of June,
Okay,
and I was 2 years old. We moved out to Gates in 1936.
see for me.
It lived right across the street from this little wooden chapel, which turned out to be St. Helen's Parish.
Okay,
And we didn't have a priest. The priest used to come from St. Augustine's
sure.
on Sunday to say mass. And in 1940, they set up, John Beecher Sullivan was at Lady of Good Counsel, and the bishop appointed him to be pastor of St. Helen's. So I was in St. Helen's Parish 4 years before it was a parish. It was a mission
Yeah.
of St.
Wow.
Augustine's.
Right, to your point, it would be a mission, it was pretty rural then.
Yeah.
Gates was,
Yeah, it was just a little
yeah,
house. It wasn't even painted. The house was real small. When Father Sullivan came, there was a room in the back. He slept in the back, and then they added on to the back. And around 1948, they started a school, and they started with the first and the second grade, I think. And this was all in the back of the church, going down Runoff Drive to the north. And then every year they would add and then they eventually built the school, which was just 2 rooms down and 2 rooms up, around that same time, and 48 I think it was. And then they, so every year they would add on another house, and my sister was she started school in St. Helen's, and we could go right out our driveway and right up the front door to the church. And my brother and I, we slept on the east side of of our house.
Yeah.
Our house was facing north,
What's his last,
and we were both altar boys.
what's his last
And
name?
Saturday mornings, we'd hear, you know, Father Sullivan would be out there waving. He said, "Come on over. I got a funeral. I gotta date some altar boys."
Yeah.
I got a lot of memories.
Oh,
I used to
yeah.
play baseball in the back. The school wasn't there, so we used to play baseball.
Sure.
The lot that the school was in. And,
I just,
Wally?
yes.
Question, who painted the fence?
I mean,
Did you ever paint the fence?
who painted the fence? The old fence, I might have painted some of it, but not, yeah. After the blinds, I shell shocked.
You gave up painting.
I didn't volunteer any, but see, the blind, you could spray the fence until somebody ran through it with a car, you know.
If St. Helens was there, how far did your property go to the west then? If it was Brooklyn, I mean to the east, if Brooklyn was sort of the west. and
Well,
Dixie-
that big field behind went all the way down to there was some people called Woodruffs that were down almost to Leadington. But I don't think it did go to Leadington. Yes.
Now that you look back on it, what do you think about your extraordinary childhood?
That's a loaded question.
It's so far it's been great. You know,
What school did you go to? Grammar school?
I went to Thomas Edison,
Oh, okay.
and then I went to Gates Childline. And
What year did you get out of East Charlotte?
I was in the class of '67, but I didn't graduate from Gates. I went away to school for a couple of years.
You were a bad boy.
Well, I wasn't. That's what I've been accused of. It really was.
You might be my son.
Well, I came home one day from school, with my report card, and my mother, who was the librarian, she was a smart lady, and I had all A's. Well, I'd been on detention study hall, and then I'd gone to sports. So, who knew, and I'd gotten all my homework done and all this, and I came home, I had like all A's, maybe 1 B plus or something like that. And I distinctly remember that she was looking at it.
Get the 30
She
list.
goes, "You're not that smart." I said, "What? You mean I'm not gonna cash on this? Because I already had the money spent, So shortly thereafter, it actually wasn't, my cousins went to this school, and she thought I needed a change. And I'd already been to 7th, 8th, my class of '67 was the last class that went right through 7th through 12th. So I already went to Gates Childline for 4 years. But then, and then there was the summers and,
When did your mother's hair turn gray? At 30?
Pardon me?
Did your mother's hair turn gray at 30?
no, shortly thereafter. But, then I'd come home and from college and whatnot, and I worked for the highway department.
You made up
And I
for
worked
it.
with Dave Benzak back there, and I were,
Nick Mancini.
oh, Nick!
Yes.
Oh, I didn't recognize.
I gotta say,
Nick went to West High.
I went to West Side, and your mom was my librarian. And she's a wonderful lady, she's dead also. I remember them doing a lot of work out in the farm, but your dad did paint that picket fence. I used to see him. I'd see him on the game wars too. And of
Oh, yeah.
course, when I got out of the Marine Corps, I working with the highway department until I got on the sheriff's department, where I had the pleasure of meeting Bill Gillette, who was a sergeant in the Gates Police. But I remember you were working in the summers, you, David, Tony Leonardo were the three college boys. And I remember.
I was on your crew.
My dad was a superintendent when he started a plaque with the college, we still have it, I still have it at home. But do you recall on Fridays after the town gates, how we used to go to your house to have cheese, crackers, hors d'oeuvres, and some little beverages before we went out? So that was a Friday night to remember. But again, thank you
Oh,
for bringing back some
thanks for coming.
memories.
It's hard, I didn't recognize you.
Been so long.
That's a distance. Well, I was on Nick's crew, you know, and Dave and I built the Pixley Road Hill.
What
We
did
did.
he do it? What did he do it?
What?
What did he do it? Eddie do it with the foreman.
Yeah, Eddie Stewart, yeah, right. Yeah, but Dave ran the roller, and I wanted to run the roller. And he wouldn't let me run the roller, and that got me mad. So I was the one I was pulling the dump trucks. They raised the bat, and then I pulled the thing. So I screwed them a little bit. I had them dumped weird places. But boy, I tell you, that was an interesting job. You know, instead of knocking the hill out, they filled in on both sides. That was a whole summer. A whole summer we did that.
That was down by the Pixley Industrial Farm.
Yeah.
That was the old elm farm, wasn't it?
Yeah,
One
mud, wasn't it?
They had a
The
training
horses.
track. Pardon me?
The horses.
the
Yeah.
horses, the
Well, that was a
horses, the barns,
beautiful,
the
that was a
servants'
beautiful
quarters,
farm.
everything, yeah.
So,
So your property didn't go to Buffalo Road, just from over to Pixley and Brooklyn, but this was the other ranch with the horse thing, that was never yours?
No, that was, I've never been able to figure, was it the Munn Farm, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, because my father was good friends with, what was his name? Well, it's Munn, I would say.
Yeah.
Harry Fincher from Fincher Rolls, used to store Oldsmobiles there.
Right. Oh. But that was a beautiful place.
Beautiful farm.
Yeah. Yellow, everything was yellow.
Yeah, what was the farm on the opposite side where Tops is? What was that?
Jacobs.
That was Jacobs, yeah.
And then Vogel's was down where DePaul is.
Right,
That was interesting, because Leonard was the bus driver, wasn't
But behind it, is the slaughterhouse.
Mhm.
Yeah.
There was slaughterhouse back there.
he? We must be old.
Don't ask what we did there.
I used to play in the barn many years ago. That's why I told you about the dynamite shack.
Yeah.
Remember them, Nick? The old dynamite shack?
Oh, yeah,
Huh?
That's really all I mean, I've been through my notes and, be happy to answer any other more questions, but I think that's.
There's someone in the Go back to visit the Hinchey homes then. Much?
Do well, they're there on Wednesdays,
Oh.
and my wife was on the board, and so when she was on the board, I went quite a bit, and.
19 gold.
No. But no, I do, I'm absolutely humbled by what they've done It's just, it really, I didn't build the house, but it is a wonderful place, And the Historical Society's done an incredible job. I mean, you know, it's not easy to maintain, say nothing about improving. Well, it really looks, I couldn't be, I could very.
Which was your bedroom when you were a kid?
Well, that was an interesting question too. No, it actually was the best one in the house, because when my grandmother died, my grandfather walked out of, according to my father, walked out of the bedroom, closed the door and never went back. He went in the back hall, which, you know, he didn't need to, but he did. And that was where he stayed for the duration. So when I needed a bedroom, I guess my parents didn't feel like they wanted to move over there, so you know, but it's the best one in the house.
How many rooms in the house?
14.
One last question. What about Jimmy?
Jimmy Cummings?
No, Jimmy goes.
Well, that's Jimmy Cummings. He's the guy.
A lot of people don't know that story.
Well, it gets back to the
Your
slave.
grandfather.
Well, yeah, but the slaves are the help or whatever. Jim Cummings was a guy that my great grandfather hired. He was like a ship's carpenter, and he was instrumental in a lot of the construction of the house. And he lived there, and he lived back in one, and I'm not sure exactly which room.
Back east,
Pardon?
the back east.
Yeah, okay. And some people think his ghost is still there. I never heard him, but you know, but he was a ship's carpenter. I'll have, thanks to John Robitaille, I didn't realize that my great grandfather at the end of his career, well, towards the end of his career, had an office in New York. And it was with the railroad, because, you know, everybody, you know, the furniture in the house, there was an overabundance of that sort of old oak, you know, stiff back stuff. Well, apparently, and it makes sense, because he probably went somewhere in New York, bought a whole living room, dining room, whatever set, put it on the train and said, drop it off, you know, because he could do that, apparently. He was,
Him and Fred Becker.
yeah,
Train sat down at the back of the property, pick them up, take them to the yard, and then drop them back off.
my father always said that he was not user-friendly. He, you know, it was his way or the highway, and it could be the highway anyway, you know. So that's all I know, but he built himself a pretty good spot. And I have a map at home or a frame thing at some point that I'll give to the Historical Society. I mean, he was in charge of, you know, all sorts of stuff for the railroad, so.
What year was, the Hinchey home and the farm established, what year?
They started the farm, and the house was started in 1874, but they lived there.
Yeah, they were there
on the
before.
property from,
Yeah, that was the first clapboard house.
Yeah.
I think that was,
1810.
yes.
1874.
The house that's
The
there
house.
now was started to be built in 1874 and was completed in 1880.
Well, that document that we found, the organizing for the town of Gates,
Yeah.
that was 1810.
Yeah.
So,
I got another one in the mail the other day from Ogden, 1809.
okay.
Johnny and I gotta go through, that's pretty cool, because that's another one
that people are giving us more and more stuff about the history that we'll be trying to record and people make, and it's a lot of fun, a lot of fun.
Thank you, Wally.
Okay, let's all thank Wally for his Now, John Robertella, good news is he's working on a book about the Hinchey family that's gonna be coming out in the future at some point. Next year, okay, super. And I'm gonna read the dedication of his book at this point. To Wilka and Cindy Hinchey, their immediate and long-standing support of the Gates Historical Society and the dedication to the rich historical heritage of the town of Gates made possible the preservation of the Hinchey homestead for generations to come. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Pick up any refreshments on your way out. And Virginia's gonna do the raffle.
Sign up.